Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Mr. Wiz here. If you are new to this channel, we build video games. So right now, we have been working in Unity for a while, and we just recently started this new project. We're making a 2D mobile game that is eventually going to be a game where we're able to shoot at objects falling down the screen. Kind of similar to an old Galaga Asteroids type game to a degree. So what we have so far, what we finished in our last video, is we now have objects that fall down the screen, and we still have a character that can move left and right. So we still have a lot more to do to this, but it's a pretty good start. Now, our characters right now, we have coded them to fall. We've also given each one its own speed. We also made prefabs out of each one. So I have 5 prefabs down here, one for each of my objects. The only difference between this and the last video that I left you guys on is that I did add a new object. So I added this little dude here. I thought he was kind of cool. I decided that I wanted one more object that went at the speed 2.5. So now each of my 5 objects has a slight difference of 0.5. This picture I actually got from AI. So I would encourage you to definitely use AI resources to make some great images. I asked them for an alien sticking his head out the window of a UFO. They gave me lots of options, but this one was kind of my favorite. So that's what I went with. So yeah, you can get images from all sorts of places to use in your 2D games. So I've got my 5 obstacles. They all have the script on them that makes them work correctly, the script that I called obstacle controls. So right now, when I run my program, these 5 objects fall, each one at its own speed. And then when it reaches the bottom of the screen and leaves the screen, it does get destroyed. You can see over here in the hierarchy, as they get destroyed, they disappear from my game. And that is to help protect us from lag. And we talked about that in the last video as well. So since we have objects that work correctly, it's time to have them spawn correctly. Rather than just dragging and dropping them into my world like they are right now, I want them to automatically get created at the top of my map and to spawn by themselves over whatever time I set and to fall down, and then the character will just have to avoid them or shoot at them, right? So that's what we need to work on today, is creating our spawning tools so that the objects spawn at the top of the game. All right, so to get started, I am going to create a new script. So this one is going to be our game manager script because it's controlling how the game works. So we're going to go ahead and create C# script, and I'm going to call it game manager, one word with a capital G and a capital M, and I'm naming it before I'm creating it. You want to name it at the very beginning to save yourself some work. I hit enter, and now it is creating the script for me over here. And I can check, and the public class name does match. I always check that when I make scripts, because if it doesn't match, it's not going to work. All right, so I've made my script called Game Manager. I'm now going to make an object in my hierarchy that's also called Game Manager. So let's go ahead, right-click in our empty hierarchy here, create an empty, and I'm going to call this Game Manager as well. I can put a space here. Oops, I put Game Manager 4 by some mistake. Let me get rid of that 4 there. There we go. So I have an object called Game Manager. I have a script called Game Manager. The object does have a space, the script does not. I am going to put the script on my object, so I'm going to drag it into the add component, and now I have the script there, and I can start coding it. So this will give us an object that controls the way the game works based on the variables and things that we add to the script. So this is kind of a go-to spot that we can go to when we need to change the rules of the game, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and start editing our game manager. So I'm going to double-click on that script and get into it here. So what I want to do is I want to create a part of the game manager that controls when these objects spawn at the top of the screen so they can come down. So what I want to do to keep my stuff a little bit more organized, there's already a start function, there's already an update function. I'm going to create a new function. So after the update function, remember all of this is part of the update function, right? This bracket is not. This bracket is the pair to that one. So we're going to leave that bracket alone. But all of this is part of the update function. So at the end of this bracket, I'm going to hit enter a couple times to create some more lines, create some more space, and I'm going to create a new function here. So void, and I can decide now what do I want to call my new function. I'm going to give it a name. Let's call it spawn. I'm going to call it spawn obstacles. And I'm going to give it my little parentheses there. That's the name of the function. I'm going to hit enter, do a curly bracket, and enter again. So I've just made this function called spawn obstacles, and I'm going to have it create my obstacles. Now for now, I'm just going to keep it simple, and I just wanted to create one just to make sure it's working. We'll add more stuff later. So I do need to create a variable on what I want it to spawn. So let's up here before the start, let's go ahead and make a variable. We'll make it a public game object. And what should we name it? I'm actually going to call it falling object. End it with a semicolon. Okay, so this is going to be the variable for what we want it to spawn. Actually, right now, let's just go ahead and save it real quick. Control S. I'm going to hop into my code. Make sure there's no errors. There doesn't seem to be. All right, in my game manager, there's my variable falling object none. I'm going to go to my prefabs, and I'm just going to drag one of my objects into it. Hey, where did my fifth prefab go? Did I forget to save it? I think I forgot to save my fifth prefab. Well, let me save it. What do I want to call this guy? Alien. I'm just going to call him Alien. That works. All right. So I'm going to drag that in my prefab. Got to make sure I have... Yeah, we'll make him an original prefab. Okay. Got to make sure I have all my prefabs working. All right. So what I'm going to do, since all of my objects are currently set up as prefabs, we're going to delete the originals. I no longer need those in my world. We're deleting all the originals, but they're still in the prefabs. In the game manager, where it says falling object none, I'm just going to grab one of these and put it as my falling object. So I'm just going to use big asteroid. So go ahead and put one of your prefabs as the falling object, and we'll use that when we start the manager, and of course we can change it later as we make edits to it, right? So I'm going to go back here. So I've got a variable called falling object, and when I spawn my obstacles, we're going to have it create one of those falling objects. So to do that, the code we use is called instantiate. Instantiate basically just means to create something, okay? So whenever we want to create something in our world, we're instantiating it. So to do instantiate, we're looking for three pieces of information. What are we creating? Where are we putting it? And how are we going to rotate it? So those are the three pieces of information they need from me. So what am I creating? I'm creating this falling object variable. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy this. I could retype it, but I'm just going to copy and paste it. So falling object, then I put a comma. Now they want to know where I'm putting it. So for my program, I need it to appear at the top of the screen here, actually above my phone device, right? I need to appear above the phone. So let's figure out what position that is. If I throw one of these asteroids in here and I move it up, let's see, we're looking at, that's about 5.5. If I drag it up a little bit higher, that's about 6 right there. I wonder if 6 would be out of range for all the devices. So I'm going to check a couple simulators and see if it's out of range on some of the bigger phones or tablets. Let's see. Got an iPad Pro 12. Looks like it's still out of range on that. Good. What about, I think there was a long skinny phone in here, the Z Fold. That one's pretty tall, and it looks like it's still out of range on that. Okay, so Y6 seems like it will work pretty good for me. I'm going to use that one. So in my code, I want it to spawn at a new vector 3. And then we're going to put our X, our Y, and our Z in here. So our vector 3 for the X, we're going to keep the X at 0. The Y, I'm going to use that 6 that we just saw, and the Z will also be 0. So now I have its position. I'm going to put a comma after that. And the last thing that I need now is the object's rotation. So we're just going to use the original prefab's rotation. No need to rotate it more than it is already rotated. So to use the original prefab's rotation, I just got to put the prefab's name, which is falling object here, dot transform, because it's the transform property that we're talking about, dot rotation. All right, so when we run the function called spawn obstacles, it should instantiate or create one of my falling objects at this position, the 0, 6, 0, and then it should have its original rotation. All right. Oh, I got to put my semicolon at the end. Almost forgot that. There we go. Now, to test this, I do need it to run this function, because remember, creating a function is not the same thing as running the function. Right now, I created it, but nothing in my code will run it. If I run my game right now, nothing's going to be created. So to test this, I'm going to go ahead and run the function in the onStart. So in my void start here, I'm going to run the function spawn obstacles. And I got to put a semicolon at the end of that. All right, so when the game starts, it should run my function one time, which will create one obstacle at the top of the screen. So let's just test it out and see if it works. Control S to save. I'll go back into my program. I'm going to delete the big asteroid that I threw in there when I was just checking the Y position. So right now, there's no obstacles in my world, just the camera, the player, and the game manager. So if I hit play, does it create an obstacle at the top of the screen? And it does. There it is. It works. It works very well. Doesn't seem centered, though. Why does my obstacle not seem centered? I think I may have messed it up when I made the prefab. Let's see. Oh, yeah, my prefab. Yeah, that X was supposed to be 0 right there. I messed up the centering when I made this. Okay. So my image should have position of 0, 0, 0. Okay. Let me back out and save that. So now it should be in the middle of the screen. And it is. There we go. So whenever the program starts, it's creating one of my obstacles at the top of the screen. It's creating the obstacle that I saved when I set it up right here. So make sure your program's working, and it is spawning the object at the top of the screen. And now we're going to move on to do some more stuff. So right now it's only spawning in the middle. I need it to spawn along this whole range, right? So that's going to be our next step here. So instead of using this position, I need the X part at least to be a little bit random. So let's figure out how we're going to do that. So I'm thinking that the range for the X direction of our object should probably match the range of the player. Remember how we set up the barriers for the player? What if we use those same numbers for the spawning? That way we can make sure the objects don't spawn further than the player is. I think that would make sense, that they would be the same. So we might just have to copy and paste some code from our player controls. Let's hop over to our script, open up our player controls, and copy some of this. So I called mine screen width in meters. So I'm going to copy this line here, Control C to copy. I'm going to pop over to my game manager. Notice, since I have both scripts open, this is going to be pretty easy. I just have to switch back and forth, right? So I'm going to put that in my game manager now. And that created the variable. Then right here is where it decided what size to make it. So we're going to copy that. And I'm going to put that in my onStart. Let's do it before the spawn obstacle. So that should set the variable to the right dimensions, right? The right distance. And now that we have that, we need to set up the X to randomly pick a number between the left side and the right side, or the positive and the negative. Okay? So for the regular phone, I think it was +2 and -2. For the larger tablets, it was +3 or +4 on some really wide ones. So we want to pick a random number between the positive value of this variable and the negative value of this variable. So to do that, we're going to use randomness. This is our first time, I think, using randomness. So we're going to do random.range, and I'm going to put a pair of parentheses here. And then inside of this, we put the range. So the one value to the other value. In this case, we're going to use the negative value and the positive value. So I'm going to put negative, the variable that we made. I'm just copying and pasting, so I'm less likely to make a typo. I'm going to put a comma there, and now I'm going to put the value without the negative. So I'm going to paste it again. There we go. So now it's going to randomly pick a value between the negative value of our border and the positive value of our border. I'm leaving the Y at 6. Let's save this and see if this works. Control S to save. Any error messages? No error messages. That's a good sign. So if I hit play, it should create it, but it won't be in the middle right now. Okay, so it's a little off to the side. Where is it positioned at? It's at negative 2.27. All right, let's try it again. Is it a different position this time? Okay, this time it is at negative 0.75. Okay, let's try it again. Hoping to get a positive number. They're all negative so far, but they are different. Any positives in here? Oh, come on. Give me a positive. I want to make sure this works. Closer to the middle. What's that one? Still negative. Did I write my code wrong? Because it should be giving me negatives and positives, but I'm only seeing negatives here. Oh my goodness, why am I not getting any positives? Hold up, is that a positive? It is a positive. 0.09. Nothing's really coming on the right side of the screen. That was almost dead middle. I may have written it correctly, and I might just be, there we go. That's a good positive. Ha ha ha. All right, what is that value? That is 0.67. Okay, so it looks like it is working. So for this particular phone, it's doing a range between -1 and +1. But that's because I'm using a very skinny phone. If I used this bigger tablet, it would probably be a bigger range. So this one is now 1.46. Yep, looks like it's working. So I have it randomly spawning somewhere between those two numbers, the positive and the negative values, and those values match the range of the player, so we can make sure that they're always spawning in the same area that the player is able to move, which keeps our game fair, right? So we're in a good place so far. We've got random spawning of position. What we need to do now is have some random objects. So instead of always creating the same object, we need to create multiple objects. We also need it to spawn on their own. Maybe we should do the spawning on their own part first. Let's do that part first. So right now I have it spawning when the game starts. I actually don't want that. I want it to spawn on intervals. So every so often it creates a new obstacle is what I'm looking for. So to do this, I'm going to create something called an invoke repeating. This is going to cause a repeating action similar to a loop, right? So my spawn obstacles, where I have it doing it right now on the start, I'm going to replace that line with invoke repeating. I hope I spelled this right. Then I put my parentheses there, and I have to tell it three things. I need to tell it what it's doing, what is the action that it's repeating. I need to tell it if there's a delay, and then also how often will it be repeating this action. So the action it's repeating is the function that I made, spawn obstacles. And I'm going to put this in quotes. And that tells it that it's looking for the thing that's called spawn obstacles. So it's repeating spawn obstacles. I'm going to put a comma after that. Then here's where I would put my delay and also how frequently it repeats. I could make variables for these. It would probably make sense for me to make variables for these. Let's go ahead and make variables for these. So public, we'll do float. Public float, start, delay. And then we'll do another one, public float, spawn interval. Did I spell interval right? I don't know. Doesn't matter. As long as I spell it the same way in my code. All right. So it's going to invoke repeating the action spawn obstacles, or my function spawn obstacles. We're going to set it up to a certain delay, whatever delay we set. And then we're going to do whatever interval we decide to set. And we can play around with that inside of Unity. Let me put the semicolon at the end. And let's save this. Hop over to the program. See if we get any error messages. All right, no errors so far. I'm going to click on the game manager. And those variables that I created, the start delay and the spawn interval, are both set to 0 right now. So I have to decide what time I want to put for these. I'm pretty sure these times are in seconds. So how many seconds between asteroids? What if we do 2 seconds between asteroids and I have 0 for the delay? What does that look like in my game? So there's the first one, there's the second one. So I've got it here on a 2-second delay, and it's spawning positives and negatives. Now, of course, right now I can hit the asteroids because I haven't coded the collision stuff yet. But this actually looks pretty decent. 2 seconds isn't bad. I could go with less time if I wanted to. I could try 1 or 1.5. But I actually don't mind the 2 seconds. And I have a 0 delay here. If I made it a longer delay, you'll notice they don't spawn right away. So if I do a 5-second delay, and I click play here, we got a little bit of a pause. The game doesn't start right away. So this is kind of an interesting little thing. If for some reason you wanted there to be a delay at the beginning of the game, you could put a delay there. For my game right now, I don't really need a delay, so I'm just going to leave it at 0 for the delay. But I like 2 for the spawn interval. I'll leave it the way it is. So we've got the beginning of a working game. We have obstacles that are spawning. They are spawning within the same range the player can move, which is very handy. They are spawning randomly. They're moving at a reasonable speed. So now what I need is I need it to, instead of just using this one prefab, I need it to pick from all of them. So I have 5 prefabs that I've made. I need it to randomly pick between them. So that'll be our next thing we do here. To do this, we have to create an array. So if you've never used arrays before, arrays are fun. They allow you to organize information. If you took my Make Code Arcade course, you already are familiar with arrays because we used arrays in Make Code Arcade to do things that included randomness similar to this. So we are going to use arrays to make our falling obstacles more random. So that'll be the next step here. So I'm going to go back into my script, my game manager script. So to create an array in my situation here, I'm going to change the public variable, the one I called GameObject, and we're going to turn this into an array. So to turn this into an array, we're adding these square brackets. The square brackets are underneath the curly brackets on your keyboard. So we're adding these square brackets, and that sets up this variable as now a GameObject array. So it's an array of GameObjects. I'm also going to change the name since we now are using multiple objects. I'm just going to put an S on the end of that. So we have an array now of falling objects. So if I go down to my instantiate area, instead of doing it this way, I'm going to delete this actually. We need it to randomly grab one from the array. So we're going to need to create a new variable, but this is a variable that's just part of this function, right? So I'm going to create some lines before instantiate here, but still after the bracket because it's still part of this function. So first off, this will be an integer because it will be a number. And I want to name it. Let me see. If my array is called falling objects, then I'm going to call this, I'm just going to call it object, I'll lower the case it, object index. So what this is going to do is this is going to randomly pick one of the objects from my array. So I'm creating a variable called object index, and that variable is going to equal. And here's where we're using our randomness again. So random.range. And now we got to put our 2 values, but for the range, right? So when we talk about arrays, arrays are basically groupings of objects, and they list them. So the computer keeps track of when we have a group of this. So if we have a group of falling objects, based on the array that we just made up here, right? If we have a group of falling objects, and I have 5 prefabs in my game, so if I put all 5 of them in there, the way that computers read arrays is they count them starting with 0. So the first object is object number 0. The next one would be object number 1, the next one will be object number 2, the next one will be object number 3, and the last one will be object number 4. So that's the way it counts if I have 5 objects. It'd be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So I want it to randomly pick one of those 5 objects. So for my random range, it's going to start at 0, because that's the first object. And then I could put 4 here if I knew that 5 was all I was ever going to use, but I don't know that. I might change it later. So instead of doing that, I want it to measure what is the length of my array. So no matter how many objects I have, it will know the range based on how big my array is. So to set the size of my array, I'm going to use the name of it here, falling objects again. Control C. And then I'm going to put dot length. So it should be creating a variable equal to some random value between 0 and the length of my array. Is that L supposed to be capital? I don't remember. If I get an error message, that's probably why. That may have to be lowercase. I'll find out soon, won't I? No, we can't test it yet because we need to finish this part. Okay, so once it picks a number between 0 and whatever the length of the array is, so in this case, Once I build my array, it'll be between 0 and 4. So once it does that, it needs to create that object. So it needs to create the object at that location, okay? So what we're going to do here is we're going to put the name of the array again, following objects. And then we're going to use those square brackets again. And inside here, we're going to use the new variable that we just made. So it's going to pick a random number between 0 and the length of my array. Then it's going to create the object at that location in my array. And then my other stuff will still be the same with the randomness, positions, and all that stuff that we had, right? I'm not changing the rest of it. All I changed was the object itself. Okay, so let's save this. Control S. Let's go back to the program, cross our fingers, hope we don't have an error. We do have an error. Following object does not exist in current context. Oh, I forgot to change one of my following objects to an S, didn't I? Yes, I did. So back here, I forgot to put the S on that. Actually, that won't work. I changed the variable. So I actually need to replace following object with the stuff over here that we just did. This whole piece. Following objects with the bracket. So I'm going to copy all of that. And I'm going to put that before the dot. So it'll be whichever object it pulls is going to use that object's rotation. So it's based on the randomness part. All right, let's save this again. See if we get any error messages this time. No error messages. That's a good sign. If I play it... Oh yeah, I forgot to build my array. My bad. Go into the game manager. So in the game manager, it now has falling objects and it says 0 behind it. If I click on the little arrow, my list is currently empty. I need to start putting array objects in here. So I'm going to hit the plus sign. I'm going to create some. So I have 5 prefabs. If you have more or less, go ahead and set however big you need this array to be and go start putting your prefabs in there for your falling objects. So I've got my alien, I've got my big asteroid, I got 2 ships, and then I have my small asteroid. While we're building this array, you'll see the numbers to the left of it. This is what I was talking about earlier. You have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. So it's going to randomly pick a number between 0 and 4. It's going to spawn that ship, and then the next time it runs, it's going to pick a random number and spawn that object. And so it should be pretty random. Let's see if it works now. Look at that. There's our first object. There's another object. So it was the same one. There we go. Here's a new one. And while this is happening, I can move left and right. Like I said, we haven't built a collision in this yet, but we will soon. We will also add a way to shoot in the future. It seems to be mostly spawning on the left, but it should be doing both sides. Here we go. There's some on the right. Sometimes with randomness, it's hard to tell if it's actually working or not, because randomness is random. But it looks like it's working. It is spawning on the left and the right pretty well. Now that I'm seeing it in real time, though, I do think my spawn interval of 2 might be too slow. So this would be a good time for me to go ahead and start tweaking these numbers, right? But this is also a good time for me to stop the video. So make sure that you get this working. Figure out what you want your intervals to be, right? To make your game look and feel good. And then in the next video, we'll start adding our colliders and things of that nature to actually make it a little bit more playable. All right. If you learned something new today, click that like button. If you're not already subscribed, please subscribe. And I'll see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day.